there was no peaceful demonstration that could be repressed. I wish that, despite the fact that I appreciate their way of expressing their concern, I want, of course, the affirmation to be sustained with some arguments and some information that will enable us to know that this thing is being done with some degree of objectivity. This is what I want to say. With regards to the third presenter, the person that talked about anti-constitutional changes, it's a very complicated issue. Even though human rights have rights to democracy and rights to vote, they also have right to development. It's a kind of complex situation. I'd like to therefore stop here. Thank you, distinguished colleague. I want us to state clearly the organization to which you are addressing your comments or your question. Honorable Sungwengbe. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to commend you for the quality of the management of the discussion. I want to quickly touch on three issues, and if time allows, I will make some comments. I want to point out that in the presentation of the report of Amnesty International, I am on page 5, as Honorable Bida has just recalled. We observed also that there were some affirmations. Madam Speaker, I'd like to recall that in their report they did mention in the second to the last page that there are some kind of prohibition of gathering that should not exceed 15 in Togo, and which is, of course, subsisting today. I want to first of all say that during the health crisis, there was some restriction to demonstration. This, of course, was extended to marriage and, of course, wakekeep and burial ceremony and all that have to do with any gathering. It is not only for the issues or issue of relating to demonstration. It is some exceptional circumstances that made the state to take the measures with a view to contain the health crisis at that time. Now, to say, therefore, that that is it, that is not actually the situation. I want to also point out that Amnesty International should update its information, because up to today, this embargo has been removed to freedom of movement. I want to underscore also that the demonstrations were organized, and civil society organization also had communique as of yesterday. He can, of course, really look at that and see if there is any embargo placed on the gathering of people up to 15 people. On page 6 also, on page 6, specifically paragraph 5. Madam Speaker, Amnesty International affirms also that among the laws on cyber crimes, several media were suspended without any information or justification. Madam Speaker, as said, it seems that the kind of value judgment. Of course, further, the presentation that we have never made mention, even any document on the sectoral regulations or on the institution or administrative institution that are in charge of the media control. They didn't even make mention of any media that was suspended, so as to give us an example. No motive. No institution in charge of it, nothing, no argument whatsoever. And I want to rest my case on the second to the last paragraph. Madam Speaker, try to sum up, distinguished MP. The second to the last paragraph, we are also told that we deploying massively cyber surveillance with spy tools with a view to perpetuate violence to human rights. And he said that Togo is one of the countries identified. I want to ask the presenter that since the terrorist group start attacking our states and killing our people, what have they been able to do? The fact that, of course, we embark on surveillance at this very material time, is it, of course, with a view of violating human rights? I like to appeal to their conscience that they contribute to ensure internal security and stability in our country, because as is presented, it is not really the situation. I want to thank you, dear colleague. Honorable Yariga, you have the floor.
Madam Speaker, let me join colleagues to commend the various organizations that have made presentations to us. I just wish to indicate that indeed this morning during our presentations we were concerned about having evidence with which to work in relation to specific countries, this Parliament. And you recall that we requested that the Commission should give us more information about the situation in various countries. So, to deepen the use of evidence in this House, it would be very helpful if organizations like Amnesty International, the West African Bar Association, coordinating with the various national bar associations to produce annual reports on human rights situations and governance situations in their various countries, and to send reports to us in this Parliament. We believe that reports coming from Amnesty, the bar associations, more likely to be impartial and rigorous in terms of gathering the evidence, which will enable this House to debate. We underscored the danger of relying on each other here, because we've discovered that there's a tendency not to, or to be economical with the truth about our various governments. And secondly, and specifically to Amnesty International and the West African Bar Association, you will see that a well-functioning state, government, and economy is the best framework for protecting human rights. A well-functioning, when the state breaks down, it becomes difficult to protect human rights. So if Burkina Faso is fighting bandits, rebels, and passes a decree immunizing, granting immunity to their soldiers, it becomes difficult for us to fight, because, quelling such rebellions, bringing terrorists and bandits under control, when they are using offensive weapons, states have to also equally use a similar force to deal with them, and human rights becomes a difficult issue to deal with. So what is Amnesty doing now to move away from just naming and shaming to helping with making sure that states don't break down, and then the human rights situation will deteriorate, and now you are reporting on incidents of violations?
Merci, chers collègues.
Dear colleague, Honorable Abiante.
Speaker, thank you, my colleagues, and special thanks to the various organizations that have spoken to us this evening. Madam Speaker and the Secretariat, I do not know how best you will put to play the fact that presentations like this would honestly benefit members of Parliament. And if that is established, the abysmal attendance is also a minus. And I don't see how this will encourage organizations that would spend quality time to conduct researches with the aim of enhancing the quality and performance of members of Parliament. So I do not know how we can adjust that. I do not also know how the Secretariat will be able to help us so that we can get full benefit from presentations like this. And if that is considered, probably ample time should also be granted for this presentation so that we can really get to much more details. We have spoken and heard so much from the various presenters. I do not know our sins. I do not know our offense. I do not know if it is our own lot. Because I've read of countries that are even closing down their correctional facilities. But in our own case down this way, you will hear of overcrowded correctional facilities. If there are no crimes, our facilities will not be overcrowded. So what is it that is opening us up to this level of criminalities? There seems to be a common denominator. That is torture. Torture, either by law enforcement, agents and agencies, torture as approved by the government of the day, probably to keep certain things away from the citizens. And if you mix that with impunity, it becomes very grave. I used to think and believe that governments are obligated to protect the rights of citizens. But if we keep hearing human rights abuses, does that translate to gradual descent? Does that translate to gradual failure of governance across board? I do not know. The stories are always the same. You would have an overthrow of government, citizens would dance on the streets. After a week, people will begin to complain. I don't know what would be responsible. Is it that we don't understand the act of governance, or we have always gotten it wrong, or there's something that we need to know? Maybe further research would help us. When next you make your presentations, I want to know why we have always failed our people. West African Bar Association, one of the things that you told us is responsible is that imposed constitutions. The constitution not coming from the people. And I didn't see any solution that you propose in this regards. I cannot count how many countries, beginning from their independence, that have not altered their instrument that guaranteed that they will be able to develop. I don't want to mention countries, but almost a large segment of our countries have changed their constitution at one point or the other. And if you look through the problems of those countries, relating same, if they had used the constitutions that were debated, that were discussed, that were negotiated, they could have done better. But once these other new ones are imposed on them, it becomes difficult to even look back to make any amends. What will be our way forward? Finally, because we don't have time, I do not know how this will help us. Globally, you have always had a Hall of Fame, and everybody will want to belong to that Hall of Fame. Everyone will want to be mentioned in the Hall of Fame. Can we also have something equivalent to the Hall of Shame, where you can interrogate the performance, the promises, the presentations of public office holders. And when they fall short of standards, you put them in that hall of shame, so that generations after them would come. You are not sending anybody to jail. But if somebody comes to tell you, I have provided electricity for 90% of my people, and you know that up to 10% of the populace don't have electricity, if you put him there, if he has another opportunity to address anybody, he will be a lot more careful to so do. I am not saying it is correct. I'm not saying it is wrong. I'm only putting it to you guys in the civil society to consider if there's an option that would help us build our morality as public office holders. Madam Speaker, let me stop at this point. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Honorable Bashir.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I second that opinion that we appreciate how you have been guiding this House. My concern and question is to Amnesty International. Come to think about it, I think we do know that your reports carry a lot of weight, especially for countries in terms of international assessment when the countries are trying to get things done. But I've always wondered whether your style of making your reports have changed or have intention of changing over time in terms of how balanced those reports are. The major issue is about human rights versus governance. And this is a major conflict. I mean, if you have a bunch of guys come out from the forest, stop a train, and take hundreds of people there into the forest, and the government is expected to read their rights to them, or a bunch of Boko Haram, whatever they call them, go into a school, Chibok, and take school kids out of there. And the government is expected to adhere to some of the principles we are talking about. Are rights actually absolutes? And this is a concern for Nigeria, because I remember the case about the Toscano jets, that the civil society organizations made a lot of reports how the Nigerian soldiers were abusing the Boko Haram or the terrorists. And this was a lot of fracas. So I would really like your own, what is your recommendation of how governments are supposed to deal with this kind of situation? Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Merci, chers collègues.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Honorable Kwame Balo.
Giving me the opportunity. I also want to join my colleagues to thank the presenters for a very job well done, and the reports are very educative. My first concern is we are going at a rate, if we are not careful as West Africa, what happened in other regions of the world in the 40s and early 60s, the population of the community is going to distinguish as we go along. The number of deaths that are happening in West Africa is alarming. And I think the bulk of the people who have been killed are the young people who are supposed to be leaders of tomorrow. So I want Amnesty International to help us to disaggregate the data on the number of deaths that have happened over the last couple of months in West Africa by age, and also what are they doing to ensure that this thing stops. And I think it is important that as a community, ECOWAS, the ECOWAS Commission and the heads of states have to come up and make a stand in making the decisions that are going to help the people. With all these sanctions and all these things happening, a lot of things are not happening in the right way. And the most fundamental thing and important thing that we need to do as a community is the involvement of the National Assembly members. Since we start the deliberations last 2 weeks, the idea or the issue of involvement of National Assembly members in their respective countries is very key. Because they are very close to the people, they will be able to play a mediation role, will be able to dialogue, so that all those people who are dissatisfied, they will be able to deal with them. And I think that is important. So that's a message that we need to take from these deliberations and from this session, that we need to move forward to work with the Commission. The other one, my intervention will go to the West African Bar Association. You are dealing with human rights issues. How do you control the movement and the behavior of some of your members? Because sometimes some members of the association will go and be doing things that are not in line with the principles of the association that was set up. I will take an example. When we had an impasse in 2017 in the Gambia, you had some people from the West African Bar Association, I don't know who sent them to the Gambia, to say they are going to support the president that who has lost the elections and is contesting the results of that election. You have people who call themselves as members of the Bar Association of West Africa. So these are very serious things, and I think it is important that we look at these issues to ensure that we work in line with the principles of our agencies, so that we are able to move forward to help one another as a community. Finally, I want to thank the team that came from the university, Kwame Nkrumah University. I think imperial data and also research is very key. For us at the level of our National Assembly, one of the key things that we are trying to put in place is to ensure that we improve the quality of research work, and also our budget office and the legal department, to ensure that National Assembly members have the resources and the ability to dig out and do some research work that will enable them to make informed choices on the work that they are going to do in the National Assembly. And I think this is a very good start that we need to do to work with this institution to make sure that research work is very key, and let it be in the forefront of our work as members of this Parliament. Honorable Speaker, I want to thank you for the coordination and the manner you are handling the affairs of the sittings of this National Assembly. I better move. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, dear colleague. Honorable Agbandao. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to commend you, first of all, for the way in which you are managing the session, and also congratulate the presenters. And that has really opened our eyes on what is happening in these institutions. I wouldn't want to take too much of your time, and also share with the comment that was made by Honorable Saklongbe Bida and Ayariga, and say that up till today, what is really, of course, worrying Togo concerning the mention that was made of Togo, that Togo was commended in Geneva when it presented the Peru of 222, and of course, the situation is to look at the security problem, the extreme violence that is threatening stability and security. I would have wished that this aspect also be brought to the fore in the report of the Amnesty International, so as to, as we say, recognize efforts that are made by countries in this direction. Otherwise, Togo is making a lot of efforts in the area of the protection of human rights. I thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, colleague, Honorable Jibo. Yes, Madam Speaker, I want to also, of course, Smako, and of course, is momentarily absent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dear colleague, Honorable Dabwe. Honorable Darboe. Darbo, sorry. Honorable Darbo.
Honorable Speaker, I also like to join my colleagues to thank you so much for the manner in which you are moderating the sitting. Equally, I would like to thank the presenters, all of them, for the documents that they have presented. Indeed, somebody was just telling me it was a kind of a lecture that were very educative, and it appears that most of the issues that we were trying to say or observe in our presentations when we were presenting the country reports, it appears there were issues that were not clearly reported as far as human rights issues are concerned, which truly reflected in this independent report. I would like to urge my colleagues, we can't do justice to this report and then try to share with our National Assembly when we return with our National Assembly or Parliament regarding the situations that are reported, especially by Amnesty International. If at all, it is contrary to the report that we have submitted. Let's see how best to do justice to the report that was submitted by the Amnesty International that has been raised a concern. Equally, the report that was also submitted by West Africa Bar Association regarding unconstitutional change, which is a cause of concern. I did made mention that when the president of the ECOWAS Commission was doing his presentation, that it is worrying and it's a threat pertaining to Africa, the manner in which we are seeing perhaps a kind of a return of military coup in Africa, which should be a signal. And there should be proper mechanism to see how best we should avert that unfortunate situation to draw its ugly face to West Africa. I have this belief and then commitment to say that this report, if we do justice and try to share the opinion that were raised here to our national parliaments or assemblies for their due consideration, and of course to our head of states for their due consideration to ensure that the issues that were raised are amicably addressed, and then we join hands to see how best to find solution to the issues that were raised as far as human rights is concerned. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Anefari. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would want to recognize the quality of the presentations of various organizations that have made presentations. Madam Speaker, on the presentation of Amnesty International, I want to point out that yes, even for all the presentations, I think that you need some time to look into them. But I see that the three countries considered, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, I want to say the analysis done on them on regime change was what happened in the past, but we are not looking at the quality of governance ahead of time, and we can get to a situation that can lead to a kind of deterioration of respect for human rights. I think that the context of governance, bad governance in these countries should be reported to attempt to counterbalance the analysis for us to understand exactly how things are. Let me take the case of Mali. It is almost a failed state. Pardon me the expression. In that country, since 2012, no government has succeeded in managing more than 50% of the territory. It is a fact. The Burkina Faso also had the same problem. Before the coup d'etat, a good part of the territory was in the hands of terrorists. These are things we should analyze with their implications. You have raised the issue of violation of human rights. Let me say, generally speaking, sometimes I will not say that there aren't confusion, but there is a slight confusion between all situations of violence and this accusation of violation of human rights. Sometimes I wonder, where do you bring in the problem of self-defense for states, for member states? In this situation where there is the need to preserve social peace, I think there are situations where people had to take actions to preserve public peace, where they are analyzed as violation of human rights. At times you have the groups who do not understand what human rights is all about. In the way they go about things, of course, the military, they are there for to defend the people. So now, when there are serious problems in the member states, what are you going to say? There's also the right for war. At times, we cannot be able to say what should happen when there are some of these issues. So I would want you to be able to try to carry out a specific typology with regards to violation of human rights in line with the actual things that are happening, so that we can use data properly in debate, even in our countries. The second issue is on the pressure on West African Bar Association. There, you emphasize on the anti-constitutional change of regimes, and we can see that West Africa has is the champion on that, because in West Africa we've had about 4 out of 4 unconstitutional change of government. West Africa has 3. You have Sudan and then West Africa. In terms of risks and dangerous trends in West African sub-region, we can say that this problem is calling us out on us, so we need to take action. You said, for example, that with this suspension of the 3 countries in question, that's Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, you can say you can also see that the citizens of these countries cannot have recourse to the ECOWAS Court of Justice. Can you give us legal reference with regards to the test, ECOWAS test, that handles this kind of situation? Because I think there's a disconnect if that is the case, because on no account should this suspension of the suspension of a member state affect the members of population of that country. As far as I know, it doesn't happen. The suspension does not affect the ECOWAS civil servants who are nationals of those countries. How do we have provisions that prevents people from these countries from having recourse to the ECOWAS Court of Justice? Can I have the reference so that the Parliament should be able to look into this case, so that we can talk to the authority office of state, so that we can correct things the way they should be, so that we can come out of this issue? Dear colleague, try to wrap up, please. Try to wrap up.
D'accord, merci.
Thank you very much. I think, can I continue? Thank you, Madam Speaker. The last point is on the presentation of USAID, the University of Science and Technology, Kwame Nkrumah. Is just a recommendation that I would want to bring forward with regards to the region of evidence-based data. Parliamentarians, generally speaking, do not have specific skills in terms of the use of evidence-based data. There is a phenomenon that you should take into account, which is the high level of renewal, of change of the MPs. The way we change parliamentarians in our parliaments. So each legislature, they will continue to have new people. So every time you have trainings. So for new members, maybe you are going to establish a partnership with the ECOWAS Parliament on a kind of training models that you can use to train the parliamentarians of the 15 ECOWAS member states. Because you continue to have a change of parliamentarians so that they can understand how to use evidence-based data. You should understand how do they understand the laws through evidence. Now, you can begin to ask yourself, what are the initiatives that we have? And how do we go about these initiatives? Thank you very much. Thank you, dear colleague. Let me give the floor to our partners, one after the other, to respond to the questions of our parliamentarians. We are going to start with Amnesty International. You have the floor, please, Amnesty International.
J'ai une liste ici que j'ai.
I have a list that I followed. It was submitted by the Secretary General. Is there any parliamentarian that would want to take the floor? Any parliamentarian that would want it? If that's the case, you have the floor, please. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I would want to equally thank you for giving me the floor. I would also want to support all the observations and comments from my colleagues. I want to raise a very worrying situation with regards to the presentation of the amnesty, a very worrying issue from the population of West Africa. You know the situation today. you can see the situation between Ukraine and Russia. You can agree with me that our countries are collateral victims of this war that is creating problems for us. And I would want to ask Amnesty International, how do they see the situation in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine? What is Amnesty International is doing for our people to be able to have their rights all over the world? Thank you. Thank you, colleague. Dear partners, you have the floor. Amnesty International, you have the floor, please.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much, honorable members of Parliament. Your views and your comments and questions are well noted. Thank you so much for this active participation during this session. I'll attempt to try and cover much of the ground as been highlighted towards Amnesty International. Let me begin by stating that when our countries ratify international treaties, it is with a clear understanding that these treaties offer promise of goodness, good governance, and prosperity and opportunities for our countries to excel. And therefore, when exceptions are applied by our countries, it must also be in line with those international law frameworks. So, for example, with regards to the right to protest, of course, we know that in every situation, this is tackling the issues of right to peaceful assembly, right to association, right also to freedom of expression. And so it's important that our countries, in imposing any sort of limitations to the exercise of these rights, should be mindful that they follow the 3 criteria that is permissible under international law. So the issue of legality, necessity, proportionality. And sometimes, while these laws were initially intended to provide certain security until the state can recover from situations, what we found is that in many cases, the restrictions go on for far longer than is necessary, or our security agents use excessive force than is necessary in those circumstances. And what is necessary is often in terms of the threat that the security agents themselves face in trying to quell the crowd. One thing that has come from our investigations is also the skill set of our security agents in tackling crowd control. In many cases, they might not have the necessary equipment in order to carry out these tasks, or they might also be following strict orders in terms of how to curtail crowds that are considered dissenters of the state. But as much as possible, the analysis is based on what are the limitations and how our state's doing in meeting them. I would also like to thank the honorable members for sharing further information, particularly on Togo. Most of what we've done was due to the time constraints that we had. We had to prioritize in terms of which information we could go in depth with. And I'm sure you noticed we prioritized cases in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, specifically because we know that many of the members are not able to participate due to the suspension of their member states. Specifically on Togo with regards to the surveillance, the Pegasus project was something that was done across the world. Within our African country, Togo was one of those that came in our radar. And if you look at our report on the cyber surveillance, and that's also something we are going to be sharing also with the Parliament, you would see that it was looking more in terms of how